Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we move on to Journal Collection number 26, and it takes place in the year 1835. Emerson turns 32 in May of that year. And with that said, he is also living in Concord, and we will catch up with him in January 6th of that year. And it begins with a short quotation which says, "To think is to act." And with that said, I will go ahead and start. No doubt we owe most valuable knowledge to our conversation, even with the frivolous. Yet when I return, as just now, from more than usual opportunities of hearing and seeing, it seems to me that one good day here is worth more than 3 gadding days in town. Sunday I went for the first time to the Swedenborg Chapel. The sermon was in the style severely simple, and in method and manner had much the style of a problem in geometry, wholly uncolored and unimpassioned. Yet was it, as I told Sampson Reed, one that, with the exception of a single passage, might have been preached without exciting surprise in any church. At the opposite pole, say rather in another zone from this hard truist, was Taylor, in the afternoon, wishing his sons a happy new year, praying God for his servants of the brine, to favor commerce, to bless the bleached sail, the white foam, and through commerce to Christianize the universe. May every deck, he said, be stamped by the hallowed feet of godly captains, and the first watch and the second watch be watchful for the divine light. He thanked God he had not been in heaven for the last 25 years. Then indeed had he been a dwarf in grace, but now he had his redeemed souls around him. And so he went on, this poet of the Sailor and of Ann Street, fusing all the rude hearts of his auditory with the heat of his own love, accessible and effectual to them also. He is a fine study to the metaphysician or the life philosopher. He is profuse of himself. He never remembers the looking-glass. They are foolish who fear that notice will spoil him. They never made him, and such as they cannot unmake him. He is a real man of strong nature, and noblest, richest lines on his countenance. He is a work of the same hand that made Demosthenes and Shakespeare and Burns, and is guided by instincts diviner than rules. His whole discourse is a string of audacious felicities, harmonized by a spirit of joyful love. Everybody is cheered and exalted by him. He is a living man, and explains at once what Whitfield and Fox and Father Moody were to their audiences, by the total infusion of his own soul into his assembly, and consequent absolute dominion over them. How puny, how cowardly other preachers look by the side of this preaching. He shows us what a man can do. As I sat last Sunday in my country pew, I thought this Sunday I would see 2 living chapels, the Swedenborg and the Siemens, and I was not deceived. January 7th. Bitter cold days, yet I read of that inward fervor which ran as fire from heart to heart through England in George Fox's time. How precisely parallel are the biographies of religious enthusiasts, Swedenborg, Guyon, Fox, Luther, and perhaps Böhmen. Each owes all to the discovery that God must be sought within, not without. That is the discovery of Jesus. Each perceives the worthlessness of all instruction and the infinity of wisdom that issues from meditation. Each perceives the nullity of conditions, but one, innocence, the absolute submission which attends it. All becomes simple, plain in word and act. Swedenborg and the Quakers have much to say of a new name that shall be given in heaven. The most original writer feels in every sentence the influence of the great writers who have established the conventions of composition, and the religious revolution effected by Jesus Christ insensibly or avowedly models each of these succeeding reforms. The boldest vision of the prophet communing with God only is confined and colored and expressed according to the resistless example of the Jewish. Luther's jocularity and learning give him the most reputation for sanity. The Quaker casts himself down a passive instrument of the supreme reason, and will not risk silencing it by venturing the cooperation of his understanding. He therefore enacts his first thought, however violent or ludicrous, nor stays to consider whether the purport of his vision may not be expressed in more seemly and accustomed forms. January 8th. There is an elevation of thought from which things venerable become less, because we are in the presence of their source. When we catch one clear glimpse of the moral harmonies which accomplish themselves throughout the everlasting now and throughout the omnipresent here, how impertinent seem the controversies of the theologians. God is before us, and they are wrangling about dead gods. What matters it whether the inspiration was plenary or secondary, whether this or that was intended by the prophet, whether Jesus worked a miracle or no, if we have access inwardly to the Almighty and all-wise One, inspirer of all prophecy, container of all truth, and sole cause of causes? All the Godhead that was in either of those ages, and either of those men, was the perception of these resplendent laws which at this very moment draw me at the same time that they outrun and overwhelm my faculties. The teacher that I look for and await shall enunciate with more precision and universality, with piercing poetic insight, those beautiful yet severe compensations that give to moral nature an aspect of mathematical science. He will not occupy himself in laboriously reanimating a historical religion, but in bringing men to God by showing them that he is, not was, and speaks, not spoke. January 9th. The only true economy of time is to rely without interval on your own judgment. Keep the eye and ear open to all impressions, but deepen no impression by effort, but take the opinion of the genius within, what ought to be retained by you, and what rejected by you. Keep, that is, the upright position. Resign yourself to your thoughts, and then every object will make that mark, that modification of your character which it ought. This were better advice to a traveller than Sir Henry Wotton's open countenance and secret thoughts. All your time will be lived. The journey, the dinner, the waiting will not need to be subtracted. The spirit of prophecy is the witness of Jesus. Madame Guyon's incapability to speak before the captious is Swedenborg's inability to utter what is not believed, though they folded their lip to indignation. Prayer is it not, the forcible subjugation for the time of the understanding to reason? I wrote in my last blotting book that we need a theory of interpretation of mythology. How true a picture is Prometheus. There are some occult facts in human nature that are natural magic. The chief of these is the glance. The mysterious communication that is established across a house between two entire strangers by this means moves all the springs of wonder. It happened once that a youth and a maid beheld each other in a public assembly for the first time. The youth gazed with great delight upon the beautiful face until he caught the maiden's eye. She presently became aware of his attention, and something like correspondence immediately takes place. The maid depressed her eyes that the man might gaze upon her face. Then the man looked away, that the maiden might gratify her curiosity. Presently their eyes met in a full, searching front, not to be mistaken glance. It is wonderful how much it made them acquainted. The man thought that they had come nearer together than they could by any other intercourse in months. But he felt that by that glance he had been strangely balked. The beautiful face was strangely transformed. He felt the stirrings of owls and bats and horned hooves within him. The face, which was really beautiful, seemed to him to have been usurped by a low devil and an innocent maiden, for so she still seemed to him to be possessed. And that glance was the confession of the devil to his inquiry. Very sorry for the poor maiden was the man, and when the assembly separated, and she passed him as a stranger in the crowd, her form and feet had the strangest resemblance to those of some brute animal. It is remarkable, too, that the spirit that appears at the windows of the house does at once, in a manner, invest itself in a new form of its own to the mind of the beholder. January 12th. Truth is beautiful, without doubt, and so are lies. I have no fairer page in my life's album than the delicious memory of some passages at Concord on the Merrimac, when affection contrived to give a witchcraft surpassing even the deep attraction of its own truth to a parcel of accidental and insignificant circumstances. Those coach wheels that rolled into the mist and darkness of the July morning, the little piazza, a piece of silk, the almshouse, the D girl, and such other things that were not the charm, have more reality to this groping memory than the charm itself which illuminated them. Quote, passing sweet are the remains of tender memory. Be assured there is as deep a wisdom in embroidered coats and blue and pink ribbons as in truth and righteousness. Is it not the stupendous riches of man's nature that gives an additional delight to every new truth? When I read a problem, I would be a geometer, poetry a poet, history a historian, sermons a preacher. When I see paintings, I would paint, sculpture carve. And so with all things the manifold soul in me vindicates its acquaintance with all these things. Similar delight we have in the admirable artist's, soldier's, or sailor's life. We individuate ourselves with him and judge of his work. What is this but our first ride round our estate to take possession, promising ourselves withal, after a few visits more, to have an insight and give a personal direction to all the affairs that go on within our domain, which is the all. January 13th. Our very signboards show there has been a Titian in the world. Do you think that Aristotle benefits him only who reads the ethics and the rhetoric? Or Bacon, or Shakespeare, or the schools, those only who converse in them? Far otherwise. These men acted directly upon the common speech of men, and made distinctions which, as they were seen to be just by all who understood them, were rigidly observed as rules in their conversation and writing, and so were diffused gradually as improvements in the vernacular language. Thus the language thinks for us, as Coleridge said. Also, Simeon the Stylite is not quite useless to me, nor Danton, nor Robespierre, nor Rabelais, nor Ayrton. And the merest speculatists, Plotinus and Dante, act most intensely on me. Fine sketch of the life of Descartes and Cousin. The student at his first course of philosophical lectures looks wistfully at every knob and ball and glass rod or cylinder, as menacing him with the occult energies which they are about to disclose to their compeller. I think I will read for a Lyceum lecture the 3 deaths of Phocion, Socrates, and Sir Thomas More. Perhaps the martyrdom of Sir John Cobham in Southey's Book of the Church might serve as a 4th. My friend, Mr. Blank, will be a good minister. Quote, when it shall please the Lord to make his people out of board. It is a great happiness when 2 good minds meet, both cultivated and with such difference of learning as to excite each other's curiosity, and such similarity as to understand each other's allusions in the touch and go of conversation. They make each other strong and confident. The unspoken part of this conversation is the most valuable. How many secrets that have puzzled us for years are then told, and with most unexpected issues. You may find, for example, that the reason of your friend's superiority in power arises, strangely enough, not from a defect, but a superfluity on your constitution. Far, very far from envy is this free communication. A mutual respect rejoices them both. Cooperation, and not exclusiveness, is the fruit. The great value of biography consists in the perfect sympathy that exists between like minds. Space and time are an absolute nullity to this principle. An action of Luther's that I heartily approve do I adopt also. We are imprisoned in life in the company of persons painfully unlike us, or so little congenial to our highest tendencies, and so congenial to our lowest, that their influence is noxious, and only now and then comes by us some commissioned spirit that speaks as with the word of a prophet to the languishing, nigh dead faith in the bottom of the heart, and passes by, and we forget what manner of men we are. It may be that there are very few persons at any one time in the world who can address with any effect the higher wants of men. This defect is compensated by the recorded teaching and acting of this class of men. Socrates, St. Paul, Antoninus, Luther, Milton have lived for us as much as for their contemporaries, if by books or by tradition their life and words come to my ear. We recognize with delight a strict likeness between their noblest impulses and our own. We are tried in their trial. By our cordial approval we conquer in their victory. We participate in their act by our thorough understanding of it. And thus we become acquainted with the fact which we could not have learned from our fellows, that the faintest sentiments which we have shunned to indulge from the fear of singularity are older than the oldest institutions, are eternal in man, that we can find ourselves, our private thoughts, our preferences and aversions, and our moral judgments, perhaps more truly matched in an ancient Lombard, or Saxon, or Greek than in our own family. It is a beautiful fact in human nature that the roar of the separating oceans, no, nor the roar of rising and falling empires, cannot hinder the ear from hearing the music of the most distant voices, that the trumpet of Homer's poetry yet shrills in the closet of the retired scholar across 3,000 years, that the reproof of Socrates stings as like the bite of a serpent as it did Alcibiades. These affinities atone to us for the narrowness of our society and the prison of our single lot by making the human race our society and the vast variety of human fortune the arena of actions on which we, by passing judgment, take part. History, taken together, is as severely moral in its teaching as the straitest religious sect, and thus we are fortified in our moral sentiments by a most intimate presence of sages and heroes. Pythagoras is said, falsely I suppose, to have declared that he remembered himself to have existed before under the name of Euphorbus at the siege of Troy. Which of us who is much addicted to reading but recognizes his own saying or thinking in his favorite authors? January 14th. Apollo kept the flocks of Admetus, said the priests, another significant fable. Every man is an angel in disguise, a god playing the fool. It seems as if heaven had sent its insane angels into our world as an asylum, and here they will break out into rare music and utter at intervals the words they have heard in heaven, and then the mad fit returns, and they mope and wallow like dogs. When the gods come among men, they are not known. Jesus was not. Socrates and Shakespeare were not. My thoughts tame me. Proud may the bard be among his fellow men, but when he sits waiting his inspiration, he is a child, humble, reverent, watching for the thoughts as they flow to him from their unknown source. The moment of inspiration, I am its reverent slave. I watch and hail its aurora from afar. January 15th. Saw the morn rise from the hilltop, but could not wait for the sun. Those long, slender bars of cloud swim like fishes in the sea of crimson light. Nor am I ashamed to be a lover of that silent sea. My grandfather William Emerson left his parish and joined the Northern Army in the strong hope of having great influence on the men. He was bitterly disappointed in finding that the best men at home became the worst in the camp, vied with each other in profanity, drunkenness, and every vice, and degenerated as fast as the days succeeded each other, and instead of much influence, he found he had none. This so affected him that when he became sick with a prevalent distemper, he insisted on taking a dismission, not a furlough, and as he died on his return, his family lost, it is said, a major's pension. We are all glad of warm days. They are so economical, and in the country in winter the back is always cold. January 16th. The whole of heraldry is in courtesy. A man of fine manners can pronounce your name in his conversation with all the charm that ever my lord, or your highness, or your grace could have had to your ear. January 23rd. Home again from Plymouth, with most agreeable recollections. Some thoughts lost. The C's and B's can finish their sermon, the man of genius cannot, because they write words and pages which are finite things, and can be numbered and ended at pleasure. He writes after nature which is endless. His work, therefore, when it is best concluded, he sees to be only begun. May I say without presumption that, like Michelangelo, I only block my statues. Mr. Hoare in the coach said of Judge Marshall that if his intellects failed he could lose as much as would furnish brains to half a dozen common men before common men would find it out. It is one of the laws of composition that, let the preparation have been how elaborate, how extended soever, the moment of casting is yet not less critical, not the less all-important moment on which the whole success depends. Ichabod Morton at Plymouth said that he did not, in dealing with his brother, look very sharply to his own interest or mind the loss of a few dollars. He wished to treat all men in the same way. January 30th. I spent at Plymouth with Lydia Jackson. February 2nd. Let Christianity speak ever for the poor and the low. Though the voice of society should demand a defense of slavery from all its organs, that service can never be expected from me. My opinion is of no worth, but I have not a syllable of all the language I have learned to utter for the planter. If by opposing slavery I go to undermine institutions, I confess I do not wish to live in a nation where slavery exists. The life of this world has but a limited worth in my eyes, and really is not worth such a price as the toleration of slavery. Therefore, though I may be so far restrained by unwillingness to cut the planter's throat as that I should refrain from denouncing him, yet I pray God that not even in my dream or in madness may I ever incur the disgrace of articulating one word of apology for the slave trader or slaveholder. Yesterday, had I been born and bred a Quaker, I should have risen and protested against the preacher's words. I would have said that in the light of Christianity is no such thing as slavery. The only bondage it recognizes is that of sin. Clytemnestra and Sophocles thinks herself too violently reproved by her daughter. Electra answers, "'Tis you that they say it, not I. You do the deeds, and your ungodly deeds find me the words." The childhood shows the man, as morning shows the day. Paradise Regained. Nothing great was ever achieved without enthusiasm. February 11th. It needs to say something, they tell me, of the French Revolution. Why, yes, I believe that it has been advantageous on the whole. I very readily seek and find reasons for any such proposition, because whilst I believe that evil is to be hated and resisted and punished, at least forcibly hindered, yet offenses must needs come, and out of them comes good as naturally and inevitably as the beautiful flower and the nourishing fruit out of the dark ground. I believe that the tendency of all thoughts is to optimism. Now for the French Revolution. I believe, in the first place, that it would be an advantage, though we were not able to point out a single benefit that had flowed thence, and were able to show many calamities. I should still incline to think that we were too near to judge, like a soldier in the ranks who is quite unable, amid the din and smoke, to judge how goes the day, or guess at the plan of the engagement. If I could see no direct good which it had occasioned, I should still say, see what great lessons it has taught the governor and the subject. It has taught men how surely the relaxing of the moral bands of society is followed by cruelty. It taught men that there was a limit beyond which the terrors of a standing army and of loyal association could not avail, that there was a limit beyond which the patience, the fears of a downtrodden people could not go. February 14th. Grand is that word of Milton in his letter to Diodati, excusing his friend for not writing to him, for though you have not written, your probity writes to me in your stead. Well said the wise ant today. Elizabeth grows on one. She is capable of humility. Her manners to the obscure are without fault. February 16th. If Milton, if Burns, if Bryant is in the world, we have more tolerance and more love for the changing sky, the mist, the rain, the bleak, overcast day, the indescribable sunrise, and the immortal stars. If we believed no poet survived on the planet, nature would be tedious. February 25th. On visits. If I had anything to say to you, you would find me in your house pretty quick. I looked upon trades, politics, and domestic life as games to keep men amused and hinder them from asking cui bono, until their eyes and minds are grown. Then came Edward's tragic verses, and I thought we give full leave to the poor man and to the parting man to feel bitterness, but not less bitter, though we give them no allowance, are the sad farewells of the realist amidst home, friends, and wealth. March 17th. Many days give me marine recollections, as today. It is because when the wind is loud and the air clear, the great masses of cloud move so fast as to suggest immediately their vicinity to the sea. The wind blowing from the west, they must reach the coast and shade the sea in an hour. Instantly, therefore, comes up before the eye the cold blue sea, gathered up into waves all rippled and scored over the wind lines, and a few sails scudding on their several tracks, though scarce seen to move over the broad black circle. But nature is a picture frame which fits equally well a comic or a mourning piece. Taylor, in the preface to his healthful poem Van Artsveld, says that sense must be the basis of all consummate poetry. It is well and truly said. We have almost a theory of Shakespeare. The wonder of Shakespeare is almost diminished when we say strong sense is the staple of his verse, because what it is to be counted for is the extent of the man, that he could create not one or two, but so manifold classes and individuals, and each perfect. But we are quite familiar with the expertness and power of men of sense in every new condition, and this experience supplies us with a just analogy. March 18th. Beauty with the ancients was the tongue on the balance of expression, said Winckelmann. What meant he? Answer. Beauty no other thing is than a beam flashed out between the middle and extreme. Herrick. Here follows a Latin quotation from Horace, untranslated. March 19th. As I walked in the woods, I felt what I often feel, that nothing can befall me in life, no calamity, no disgrace, leaving me my eyes, to which nature will not offer a sweet consolation. Standing on the bare ground with my head bathed by the blithe air and uplifted into the infinite space, I become happy in my universal relations. The name of the nearest friend sounds then foreign and accidental. I am the heir of uncontained beauty and power. And if then I walk with a companion, he should speak from his reason to my reason, that is, both from God. To be brothers, to be acquaintances, master or servant, is then a trifle too insignificant for remembrance. Oh, keep this humor, which in your lifetime may not come to you twice, as the apple of your eye. Set a lamp before it in your memory which shall never be extinguished. I think Taylor's poem is the best light we have ever had upon the genius of Shakespeare. We have made a miracle of Shakespeare, a haze of light instead of a guiding torch, by accepting unquestioned all the tavern stories about his want of education and total unconsciousness. The internal evidence all the time is irresistible that he was no such person. He was a man, like this Taylor, of strong sense and of great cultivation, an excellent Latin scholar, and of extensive and select reading, so as to have formed his theories of many historical characters with as much clearness as Gibbon or Niebuhr or Goethe. He wrote for intelligent persons, and wrote with intention. He had Taylor's strong good sense, and added to it his own wonderful facility of execution, which aerates and sublimes all language the moment he uses it, or, more truly, animates every word. I ought to have said in my wood thoughts just now that there the mind integrates itself again. The attention which had been distracted into parts is reunited, reinsphered. The whole of nature addresses itself to the whole man. We are reassured. It is more than a medicine, it is health. In talking weeks ago with MME, I was ready to say that a severest truth would forbid me to say that ever I had made a sacrifice. That which we are in healthy times seems so great that nothing can be taken from us that seems much. I loved Ellen, and love her with an affection that would ask nothing but its indulgence to make me blessed. Yet when she was taken from me, the air was still sweet, the sun was not taken down from my firmament, and however sore was that particular loss, I still felt that it was particular, that the universe remained to us both, that the universe abode in its light and in its power to replenish the heart with hope. Distress never trifles, never abate my trust. Only this Lethean stream that washed through us, that gives sometimes a film or haze of unreality, a suggestion that, as C said of conquered society, we are on the way back to annihilation. Only this threatens my trust. But not that would certify me that I had ever suffered. Praise, praise and wonder, and oft we feel so wistful and babe-like that we cannot help thinking that a correspondent sentiment of paternal pleasantry must exist over us in the bosom of God. March 19th. Spare the poor Emmet, rich in hoarded grain. He lives with pleasure, and he dies with pain. At Waltham they have 11,000 spindles, at Lowell 200,000. The road that luxury levels for the coach, industry may travel with his cart. E.B.E. Through nature's ample range in thought to stroll, and start at man the single mourner there, Young. Heaven kindly gives our blood a moral flow, Young. Landor writes that no man ever argued so fairly as he might have done, and in a reflecting, highly cultivated society it seems as if no man could ever be in a passion, or act with a negligent, self-forgetting greatness. Can Webster in the American Senate, for any conceivable public outrage, scream with real passion? The reporters say he did the other day. They did not think so when they wrote it, and nobody believes it was anything else than a fine, wise, oratorical scream. Never utter the truism, but live it among men and by your fireside. This rebellious understanding is the incorrigible liar. Convict him of perfidy, and he answers you with a new fib. No man speaks the truth or lives a true life 2 minutes together. March 23rd. There is no greater lie than a voluptuous book like Boccaccio, for it represents the pleasures of appetite, which only at rare intervals, a few times in a lifetime, are intense, and to whose acme continence is essential, as frequent, habitual, and belonging to the incontinent. Settle it in your mind that you must choose between your own suffrage and other people's. I used to think, all men used to think, that you can have both, but you cannot. Secure your own, and you shall be assured of others, 20 years hence, but you must part with them so long. Before this reason with bright eternal eyes, even merits that seem pure and saint-like compared with practices and reputations of the mob are seen to be vulgar and vile. There are merits calculated on shorter and longer periods. Better than those of the hour are the Benthamite and the Calvinist, who keep the law all their life for pay. But these dwindle before the incalculable eternity which the lover of virtue embraces in the present moment. The virtue of the intellect consists in preferring work to trade. Brougham, Canning, Everett convert their genius into a shop, and turn every faculty upside down that they may sail well. Alston, Wordsworth, Carlyle are smit with the divine desire of creation and scorn the auctioneers. Now, what you do for the shop is so much taken from science. R cannot eat sponge cake without a ramrod. There is almost no earnest conversation, so much of display enters into it. Put two people of good condition together, the talk on one or both parts will probably be merely defensive. That is, they are not thinking how they may learn something, but how they may come off well. Change your parties, and perhaps you excite the ambition of each speaker to say something brilliant, to leave a good opinion of himself. Ordinarily, men do not exchange thoughts and converse in method, that is, advancing. One goes east, the other west. The preacher goes amongst his people, the professor amongst his scholars, and finds an universal admiration of his sermons or lessons. But the first word they speak on the general subject shows him that these discourses never penetrated farther than the ears. They have a sort of instinctive respect for this train of thought and the profession which belongs to it, but they live in another train of thought that in particulars flatly contradicts his. And when he thinks a perfect understanding is obtained, he finds the whole battle remains to be fought. Did you ever take part in a conversation which advanced? Commonly it is merely pastime. They circulate round point no point. Each remains fast in his own aura, and not once do they communicate. Dr. H., Mr. B., Mr. S., Mr. I., the most powerful men in our community, have no theory of business that can stand scrutiny, but only bubble built on bubble without end. They skate so fast over a film of ice that it does not break under them. It seems, when you see their dexterity in particulars, as if you could not overestimate the resources of good sense, and when you find how utterly void they are of all remote aims, as if you could not underestimate their philosophy. Cannot a man contemplate his true good so steadily as to be willing to renounce all thirst for display, and make all his doings tentative, imperfect, because aiming ever at truth and perfection lying out of himself, instead of tricking out what trifles he has picked up, and disposing them to advantage in little popular poems, or conversation, or books? I think he had better live in the country, and see little society, and make himself of no reputation. Sects fatten on each other's faults. How many people get a living in New England by calling the Unitarians prayerless, or by showing the Calvinists to be bigots? Hallett feeds on the Masons, and McGavin on the Catholics. The poor man that only sees faults in himself will die in his sins. Charles thinks the Unitarians pursue a low, conservative policy. The high, the generous, the self-devoted sect will always instruct and command mankind. It is because I am such a bigot to my own whims that I distrust the ability of a man who insists much on the advantage to be derived from literary conversation. Alone is wisdom, alone is happiness. Society nowadays makes us low-spirited, hopeless. Alone is heaven. March 26th. The wild delight runs through the man, in spite of real sorrows. Nature says, he is my creature. In spite of all his impertinent griefs, he shall be glad with me. Almost I fear to think how glad I am. I went by him in the night. Who can tell the moment when the pine outgrew the whortleberry that shaded its first sprout? It went by in the night. March 27th. He who writes should seek not to say what may be said, but what has not been said that is yet true. I will read and write. Why not? All the snow is shoveled away, all the corn planted, and the children and the creatures on the planet take care of without my help. But if I do not read, nobody will. Yet am I not without my own fears. Captain Franklin, after 6 weeks traveling to the North Pole on the ice, found himself 200 miles south of the spot he set out from. The ice had floated. And I sometimes start to think I am looking out the same vocables in the dictionary, spelling out the same sentences, solving the same problems. My ice may float also. March 28th. If my life were long enough, among my 1,001 works should be a book of nature, whereof how its seasons should not be so much the model as the parody. It should contain the natural history of the woods around my shifting camp for every month in the year. It should tie their astronomy, botany, physiology, meteorology, picturesque, and poetry together. No bird, no bug, no bud should be forgotten on his day and hour. Today the chickadees, the robins, bluebirds, and song sparrows sang to me. I dissected the buds of the birch and the oak, and every one of the last is a star. The crow sat above as idle as I below. The river flowed brimful, and I philosophized upon this composite, collective beauty which refuses to be analyzed. Nothing is beautiful alone. Nothing but is beautiful in the whole. Learn the history of a craneberry. Mark the day when the pine cones and acorns fall. A wonderful sight is the inverted landscape. Look at the prospect from a hill high through your legs, and it gives the world a most pictorial appearance. Saturn, they say, devoured his children, thereby pre-signifying the man who thought and instantly turned round to see how his thoughts were made, the hen that eats the egg. March 29th. Certainly a man would be glad to do his country's service, but he cannot cram his service down its throat. It is time enough if he come when he is called. It is enough for him if he has eyes to see that he is infinite spectator without hurrying, uncalled to be infinite doer. Let him brood on his immortality. Quote, "For every gift of noble origin is breathed upon by hope's perpetual breath." He cannot look to work directly on men, but obliquely. Few men bring more than 1 or 2 points into contact with society at once. They must be content to influence it thereby. Hereafter they may find more purchase. We live and grow by use. If you sit down to write with weak eyes and awaken your imagination to the topic, you will find your eyes strong. March 31st. The tree is a congeries of living vegetables. So it often seems as if man was a congeries of living spirits, according to Goethe's monadism. One of them looks to see what another does. Many dissimilar things are done with like earnestness. The robin hops about in the field as if he was waiting for somebody. Hop, 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 and then stops again. The dreams of an idealist have a poetic integrity and truth. Their extravagance from nature is yet within a higher nature, and terrible hints are thrown to him out of quite unknown intelligence. I have been startled 2 or 3 times by the justice as well as the significance of the intimations of this phantasmagoria. Once or twice the conscious fetters of the spirit have been unlocked, and a freer utterance seemed attained. April 10th. I fretted the other night at the hotel at the stranger who broke into my chamber after midnight claiming to share it. But after his lamp had smoked the chamber full, and I had turned round to the wall in despair, the man blew out his lamp, knelt down at his bedside, and made in a low whisper a long, earnest prayer. Then was the relation entirely changed between us. I fretted no more, but respected and liked him. Coleridge said it was no decisive mark of poetic genius that a man should write well concerning himself. Is it not because the true genius, the Shakespeare and Goethe, sees the tree and sky and man as they are, enters into them, whilst the inferior writer dwells evermore with himself, twinkling restlessly? A man is seldom in the upright position 2 moments together, but when he is, let him record his observations, and they shall be fit for the spiritual inquirer. Le Baron Russell has visited me and shown me the stars. Hither came G, as usual appearing as if bestridden by a restless and invisible rider. April 11th. Glad to hear music in the village last evening under the fine yellow moon. It sounds like cultivation, domestication. In America, where all are on wheels, one is glad to meet with a sign of adorning our own town. It is a consecration, a beautifying of our place. A bugle, clarionet, and flute are to us as a momentary Homer and Milton. Music is sensuous poetry. April 12th. The gods make those men very bad who talk much about them, says Landor's Cyrus. It must be owned that the idea of God in the human mind is a very changing luminary, sometimes seen, never quite unremembered, often quite hidden to the degree that the spirits ask, "Is there any?" But the moral sentiments are immutable. Was there ever a moment in your life when you doubted the existence of the divine person? Yes. Was there ever a moment in your life when you doubted the duty of speaking the truth? No. Then is one mutable, the other immutable. Here is a insertion from the editor. Here follows the passage on the dark hours of life found in the opening paragraph of The Tragic, first printed in The Dial. See Natural History of Intellect. A man feels that his time is too precious, the objects within reach of his spirit too beautiful, than that his attention should stoop to such disfigurements as anti-Masonry or convent riots, or General Jackson in the Globe. Yet welcome would be to him the principle out of which these proceed, for all the laws of his being are beautiful. This translation the wise is ever making. Already my opinion has gained infinitely in force when another has adopted it. This is the reason why a writer appears ever to so much more advantage in the pages of another man's book than in his own. Coleridge, Wordsworth, Schelling are conclusive when Channing or Carlyle or Everett quotes them, but if you take up their own books, then instantly they become not lawgivers, but modest, peccable candidates for your approbation. Emerson writes briefly on Language of Nature. No man ever grew so learned as to exhaust the significance of any part of nature. Nature never became a toy to a wise spirit. The flowers, the animals, the mountains reflected all the wisdom of his best hour, as much as they had delighted the simplicity of his childhood. April 14th. Ne, te, etc. Every man is a wonder until you learn his studies, his associates, his early acts, and the floating opinions of his times, and then he develops himself as naturally from a point as a river is made from rills. Burke's orations are but the combination of the Annual Register, which he edited, with the Inquiry on the Sublime and Beautiful, which he wrote at the same time. Swedenborg is unriddled by learning the theology and philosophy of continental Europe in his youth. Each great doctrine is then received by the mind as a tally of an idea in its own reason, and not as news. Reverend Dr. F. consoled my father on his deathbed by telling him he had not outlived his teeth, etc., and bid my mother expect now to be neglected by society. This is the end of Part 1 of Emerson's Journal Collection number 26. In the following video, we will take up with Emerson in April 16th of 1835. He is age 31, but in May will turn 32. Thank you for listening.